me introduce myself, but I'll be moderating tonight's discussion and featuring speakers from Vancouver and Calgary. So it's going to be a very important discussion. So thank you everybody for joining. But before, I'd like to start off with acknowledging that this discussion that we'll be having this evening is hosted by the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, as well as the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, Kainai, and Piikani, the Métis Nations and the Nakota Nations, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta, the original caretakers of these lands. And I think that by rooting our discussion within this territorial acknowledgement, we can really think deeply about our meaningful, think deeply and meaningfully about our history of migration here to these lands, because we will be getting into that this evening as well in terms of our history of migration, where we are now as a community, and where we hope to go. In terms of who's hosting this evening, in terms of the organizations, Taloyan, which means Bridging the Gap, is a grassroots community-powered group with a mission to bridge the ever-growing Filipinx diaspora through events promoting language, retention, culture, and history. And I think that we have some members in our panel this evening who are involved with that organization. And also a shout out to Filipinos Rising, is a nonprofit Filipino organization based in Alberta, Canada, working on creating resources aimed at Filipinos to help them navigate through the system for government assistance and basic needs in the language that they're comfortable with. So again, I think we will have some representation of people from that organization here with us this evening. Very exciting. I'm very excited for this. It's nice to actually have this kind of webinar with sisters across provinces. But I also wanted to really give a special shout out to the hard women that have actually worked to organize this event. They may not be here this evening, or they may be joining us later, but we have Ati Sammy Jo Rambua, Minnie Antonio, Nelly Agbolos, who will be speaking this evening, Izzy Fortuna, and Justine Ramirez. We also wanted to give a special thank you to the Hummingbirds Rising Consulting, particularly with Rhiannon and Andrea, who help daily non-Indigenous Canadians develop the skills, compassions, and abilities to recognize and change systems and practices so they can play an active and meaningful part in decolonization. We'll send you a link to their organization at the end of this event, but keep that in mind. Decolonization is going to be a big part of the discussion this evening. So hopefully for those who have joined us, welcome to the webinar, and get your questions ready, as we will be asking the questions that you sent to us this evening. So before I start getting into who the speakers are, I just wanted to run into some of the housekeeping rules this evening. And just some things that we hope to also, that we do have in mind that we aren't able to really do right now, is that this event, unfortunately, is not live captioned at this time, but we really hope that, if we keep having discussions like these ones, that we'll be able to do that in the future. This event really centers the voices of Filipinas, Filipinx, and Filipino people, depending on how you identify yourself. Again, something that we will be discussing this evening. And although the Philippines has, almost 200 different languages and cultures with over 7,100 islands, we will be speaking in English, which is known to be a colonizer's tongue, but in terms of comfort and also in terms of the discussion, we will be using English peppered as well with Tagalog. And those who speak Tagalog, you'll have to help me. My family is Ilonggo, so I'm more comfortable in Ilonggo. So hopefully shout out to the Ilonggos who've joined us as well. At this time, the attendees, again, thank you for joining us. I think we've got Anthony and Christina that have also joined us, as well as Grilly, Aiden, Rhea, D, Excella, Rosanna have joined us. You will be muted, but please check your email so you could join us later on after the event for an optional chica chica chat. So I will be moderating this event, but you can definitely ask us questions. You can send it through the chat, and we will be voicing out your questions. And as many of you may already know, we are not doing this on Facebook Live. It's also to be able to have a very fruitful and safe discussion. So this is also why we've had people sign up for this event as well. So we'd also like to just really call out that we are a very diverse community with very diverse and different experiences. So some of the experiences and things that we'll be discussing this evening will be new to maybe some of you, maybe all of you, maybe to none of you, but we really do hope that you do keep an open mind, and the speakers as well will be keeping an open mind in terms of the questions, and I think maybe even comments and opinions that you attendees, thank you for joining us, will be giving us this evening. So that's it for the ground rules. I wanted to right away get into the panelists, because I think that I've been talking too much, and I'd really like the panelists to actually start throwing in their opinions. But before that, I just wanted to introduce who they are. First, we have Ate Francia Bodoso, and her pronouns are she and her. And she is a counselor, a family violence counselor at the Catholic Calgary Immigration Society. And she has worked with Doctors Without Borders with the Belgium section as a social worker for almost 10 years, providing psychosocial intervention for the street children in Manila. And she is also the president of the Association of Filipino Social Workers in Alberta. So Ate Francia, thank you so much for joining us. Next up, we have Nelly Agbolos. Their pronouns are she and they. And Nellie is a youth services coordinator at the Frog Hollow Neighborhood House in so-called Vancouver, BC. She has led community projects on issues of ending sexual violence, food waste prevention, and urban composting, and art as activism. And Nellie is the chair of Gabriela BC and the coordinator of Tagalog Time YBR. So welcome, Nellie, to the webinar. Next up, we have Darla Tumeldan. Her pronouns are she and her, and Darla is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant with more than 20 years of legal advocacy experience in anti-oppression and anti-violence work in the nonprofit sector. She's also the founding member of Pinoy Pride Vancouver Society, whose mission is to increase visibility, raise awareness, promote acceptance, and to provide a safe and respectful space for the Filipino-Canadian LGBTQ community. And I think we have some members from Pinoy Pride joining us this evening. So that's great to know and to see that. So everybody, welcome Darla to the webinar. Next up, we have Laarni Bernardo, and her pronouns are she, her, and hers. And Laarni was born and raised in Baguio City, Philippines, and she migrated to Vancouver in 2018. I've been learning a little bit more about Laarni. She has many credentials. She's a certified psychological first aid responder, clinical trauma specialist, and registered clinical counselor. And among the many jobs that she has, she is currently working with and for youth in various capacities as a clinical counselor for the Mosaic Youth Center. And the last speaker that I'll be introducing is Jax Gallos Aquinas. Their pronouns are she, they, and sha. Jax was born in Montreal, and she's a queer Filipinx writer, visual artist, facilitator, and musician dedicated to anti-racism, cultural identity, equity, abilities, and representation. She also co-founded Bahagari, a two-spirited LGBTQIA plus Filipinx grassroots community with chosen allies in the Mokinsits community. Their first book, Home is in the Body, a two-spirited LGBTQIA plus Filipinx femme north of the 49th parallel, is actually coming out next month, published by Anak Publishing in Winnipeg. So those are your speakers for the evening. We will be getting right on to the discussion. Again, I just wanted to welcome those who joined in the last couple of minutes as I was introducing the speakers. Thank you so much. Paulo, Rowan, Gloriel, Jay, Rosanna. I think I've mentioned you guys already, but thank you for joining us. So for this evening, we will be talking in terms of the Filipinx, and Filipino community in Western Canada, particularly in the last few months, how COVID-19 has highlighted our community. We've been thrown into the spotlight once again. It seems like whenever there seems to be a global crisis, Filipinos are thrown into the spotlight, primarily because in this situation, we have a high representation in the healthcare system as well in the service industries. And we are seen primarily as essential workers, whether or not you're working in the grocery stores or you're working as a migrant worker. We are seen as, one of the highest visibly known essential workers. And despite the fact that we are the fourth largest immigrant group in Canada, we are still quite underrepresented in the social and political leadership institutions across the country. So we've also want to highlight our achievements in our community as well. So it's not always doom and gloom, as some people had apparently mentioned, but we do want to talk about these very important issues. So we will be opening up our panel right now. And I just wanted to say hello to all the panelists, and how are you guys doing this evening? Okay. Fantastic. Everyone's being very polite, but hopefully it'll be a little bit more energetic as we move along in the discussions. So to get us started off in terms of our history here, I'm going to pass it on to Darla. So Darla, if you could really share in terms of our migration here to these lands, what were the first catalysts, what brought us here? If you could share with us. And there you go. So Darla is actually.
Can you see it?
There you go. Darla?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're a little bit faint, but
okay.
If you could bring your volume up a little bit, and then you could go ahead and get started on the little mini presentation that you prepared in terms of the history of migration to Canada.
Yeah, so bear with me. I only have 2 minutes to talk about the history of Filipino migration to Canada. Yeah, first of all, I just want to say, naimbangal daw yu ako. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon. So it's going to make it short and sweet. So which factors are the reasons why people left Philippines, and talking to the people that I've been involved with through my work and through my social life. These are the reasons why they've left the Philippines. Persecution, fear, natural disasters, poverty, unemployment. And then there are pull factors as well, and the reasons why people move to Canada in search of freedom, safety, stability, and new opportunities. Now, most of the Filipino migrant women I've worked with are single mothers. Some of them were escaping an abusive husband. So yeah, they were in search of freedom, and a lot of them were single moms. So they were in the search for new opportunities. They had to support their children and stability as well. Some of them have said that actually the migration has increased their access to economic resources, which in a way has improved their autonomy. But there is a trade-off with that. You know, they get their autonomy, but there are instances where they are being exploited by their employers. There's family separation. And when they do get together with their families, there's family reunification issues. So there are trade-offs as well. Okay, so Filipino migration to Canada. When you read history books, the first date that comes up is 1930. Actually, there was some information that there were some settlers in 1898 on Bowen Island, actually. And names were Benson, Matilda, and William Flores. They were a family, and the men were beachcombers and fishermen. And then The ones that were recorded are in 1930, and then in 1950, 10 Filipinos were recorded in Manitoba. A lot of Filipinos come from Manitoba. At the end of World War II, there was little or no record of Philippine migration to Canada, and it's because a lot of Filipinos, we were simply lumped together with other immigrants in a category labeled other countries not British. So this is what community, Filipino community looked like in 1967. And these are the figures for the intended occupation of immigrants from the Philippines. So you can see that total immigration number is 2,994. That was in 1967. And the majority of Filipino immigrants were mostly school teachers. If you look here, it's professional and technical. There were school teachers, physicians, nurses, accountants, science technicians, and also in the service and recreation category, and mostly were nurses' aides. Now, an interesting fact too is that majority of them were female. 2,299 as compared to males, 695, and that was in 1967. Now, moving on to 1976, I have to skip forward because I only have 2 minutes. This act was considered progressive piece of legislation. And then 1980s, that's where a huge number of Filipino domestic workers and nannies increased. And then after that, foreign domestic movement program, we had the living caregiver program, later on the caring for children, and then now the home child care provider pilots. But a lot of advocates, you know, see that it's just, it's the same program, it's just repackaged. I wish I could talk a little bit more about that, but maybe in another session. And then in, so forward to 1990, 1991, 1993, more skilled workers and sponsored relatives were admitted to Canada. In 2002, the Immigration Act encouraged even more Filipinos to come. And 2002, this act is important to me because that's when the definition of spouse was changed. I came to Canada under humanitarian compassionate grounds. My partner and I have been together for 38 years now. We met in school in the Philippines. She came in through the foreign domestic worker program, but she wasn't able to sponsor me because the definition of spouse at that time, that was in 1994, was someone of the opposite sex. So we had to submit a humanitarian compassionate application, and we joined forces with LEGIT, Lesbian and Gay Immigration Task Force, and we continued to lobby the government. I was allowed to come in on humanitarian compassionate grounds, but it's discretionary, right? We wanted it legislated. So we fought, and finally in 2002, they say, yeah, it's not fair because we're not defined as a family in the charter, you know, in the Immigration Act, which goes against the Charter of Rights. So that's a very important date for me, so 2002. So now you can sponsor your common law or your same-sex partner, whether you're married or not. So that was a huge, yeah. So you can see in early years, easy migration and fast approval for PR. There's no trouble finding suitable jobs. Most were able to practice their professions in Canada. Renting or buying a house was affordable back then. And in later years, processing took years and considerable costs. A lot of credential recognition problems right now, and there's a high cost of living. As of 2016, there are 851,000 people of Filipino descent living in Canada, mostly in urbanized areas. This one's around the world. OFW's remittances hit a record high of $33.5 billion in 2019. And more than 2 billion come from Canada. It's good to know. These are the resources I had used. Now I'm just gonna go this real quickly, probably another 10 seconds. I just wanna show that Philippines has always been a top 10 source country. In 2007, we were the third. 2008, we were the third. 2009, we were the third. 2010, we were the top source country, permanent residents. 2011 and 2012, we were top source. And then 2013, we were the third. 14, we were the first. 15, we were the first. 16, we were the first again. 17, we were the first again. Oh no, we're the second. And then 18, we're the second. So all these years, we were always the top three. And then I also want to show the study permit holders by country of citizenship because a lot of Filipinos are now coming through the study permit pathway. Okay, so we can get enough points to apply for express entry. And then we have the temporary foreign worker program work permit holders as well, the past 5 years. And then the international mobility program work permit holders. These are spouses of students and whatnot, and then the other categories as well. Okay, that's it. History, and I think I went a little bit more than 2 minutes.
It's okay. Thank you, Darla, also for preparing that slideshow. I think it's really important. It was really important to actually go through a little bit of our history. There's a lot to cover, so much to cover. And I think that we'll be able to really discuss more of our history as we go deeper into our discussion. But it was really interesting just to see the history starting from the late 1800s. Actually, if for those in Vancouver, I'm not sure if it's reopened, but it was already really by appointment. But if you have a chance to go to the Vancouver archives, you can actually see a picture of William Flores. It's all sepia toned. There's a mugshot of him. He lived a very colorful life here in Vancouver. So just a little bit of Filipino history there. Go to the Vancouver archives, look up William Flores and read all about his life there. So it's really interesting to see a little bit about our community way back when. Also just letting attendants know that you can post questions just in the Q&A section of your screen. Go ahead, post your questions and we will be able to read them out. We'll select some for those who are eager to have to share questions. We'll be able to post them and share with them later on when we take Q&A. So I just wanted to also head over to Ate Francia and to see, do you have any comments just following up with Darla's presentation in terms of the history of migration here to Canada?
Yeah, actually, I think she covered from 1980s to now, right? But I think it's interesting to, when I was doing some research and I got most of the information that Darla presented, but it's interesting to also know that most of the first Filipinos from migrating to Manitoba were actually from the US. They're not from the Philippines. So, and they are mananahe. They're sewers. They were mananahe for the clothes of the soldiers. So I thought that's not covered by Darla. I was thinking she covered everything. But it's also interesting to understand that the temporary foreign workers are dropping down, but there's so many student visas or Filipinos are coming now under the study permit, and there's a lot attached to that are actually issues that we are seeing now, especially now after several years of allowing people of Filipinos coming as a student visa. So yeah, that would be. Thank you.
Sorry there, I was talking and I was completely muted for a while. Thank you, Ate Francia, for your comments in terms of the history of migration. It looks like we are getting some questions from our attendees. Thank you so much. We'll be asking them later on this evening in the second part of our discussion. So we are going to move on to the next question, though, that we'd like to cover, which I think everybody in the panel will be able to discuss, I hope, and get into. So many of our panelists here, you guys are all involved in different communities. Many of you are social workers and artists and work in immigration and with the community. So I guess one of the questions that we want to really discuss is, what were your concerns within the communities that you work in before COVID hit? I mean, it's been, I think it's been really busy the last few months. The world has really changed. But what were your primary concerns in terms of the communities that you work with before COVID hit? And anybody can start. If not, then I will pull a name out of the hat. Okay, I'm going to get Nellie. Maybe Nellie can talk.
Sure, I'm happy to be the first person to talk on this very big question. So hello, everyone. My name is Nellie. I'm here on behalf of Gabriella BC. And since I have 2 minutes, I'm going to just dive into it. And I think the first point that I want to make is that COVID-19 really revealed the inequities faced by women migrant workers who are typically domestic workers, and they might also be frontline workers in the healthcare, restaurants, grocery stores, travel industry, and the agricultural sector. They make up a huge bulk of that force. And some of these concerns can stem from racism that they experience in the workplace and within our own Filipino community. Another concern would be workplace safety. Filipino women are most likely overworked, and they may not be provided with personal protective equipment. Another concern in regards to workplace safety is that their workloads would have increased. Women migrant workers are probably being asked to work more. I know some that have been, and they're also not earning the money that they should be earning for the longer hours that they're working. Another big issue that involves CERB, which is the payment that some folks are able to receive in regards to how COVID-19 has impacted working class folks. CERB isn't long-term. So for women migrant workers who are working in very precarious industries that I've mentioned, such as healthcare, restaurants, and grocery stores, what happens when CERB runs out? CERB is only going to be here for 4 months. That's what we've been told. So how will these women migrant workers who tend to work long shifts and maybe work for multiple care homes, how will they be supported? And the last concern has to do with temporary foreign workers. There's an issue of whether or not they will be able to receive help from the Philippine government. So going over these 5 concerns, it's important to note as well that these concerns that we are expressing that's come up during COVID, we also carry them with us after COVID because they have always been there. COVID just further intensified them, and working class women and their families have to bear the cost and impacts of a system that profits from the exploitation of the majority. So that's something to think about as I pass this along to another fellow panelist.
Jax, would you like to go and share your thoughts? Mainly because I'm not trying to point fingers at you, but you also work in the arts. So I think it would be really interesting to hear your take as well, and also just bouncing off Nellie's comments.
Thank you so much for this space. Yeah, one of my main concerns before COVID was always anti-racism and representation, and creating spaces so that work is representative and authentic, not tokenistic, or even caricaturizing of our people. I found that, like, in working in film or in any arts sector, often spaces for racialized Black, Indigenous folks are tokenistic in the sense that most leadership is not racialized or Black, Indigenous, and it's often only in the programming of artist-run or art spaces that that dedicates space to racialized people. So I've been very fortunate to have worked with certain groups that are intentional about making all cast, all crew, BIPOC, QT BIPOC even, where it's so open and kind, where you have people asking for pronouns and being mindful of like anti-oppressive language and having gender neutral restrooms. But for our group, I don't like, there are very few roles that you'll see that are intentionally specific for the Filipinos. I've worked with some actors where they'll just say they've never been asked to play a Filipino. It's been like Asian doctor, Asian engineer, whatever, but it's never been specific. So there's a rise, and I'm encouraging the people I know. I saw Bernadette in there, I'm calling you out, but she's a writer here in Calgary and a filmmaker, and with content that speaks to our reflections of reality as immigrants, as people who don't get often the chance to hear our language on screen, and our realities represented in a way that only we would get. So in the arts, I'm always excited to hear and read scripts that speak to our experiences specifically and aren't just like a generic, let's just plunk Filipinos in like a script made for white people. Anyways, yeah, so representation has really been very meaningful to me. And being in spaces like this, I went to the Pinay Power conference last year and meeting other amazing writers and musicians like Kim Mortal, and hearing Han sing rap in Tagalog. It's just so like, it's like nothing else I've never, or even to laugh like at the Tita Collective. Like if you check them out, please, if you haven't already, because to laugh at your own like story is, and to see yourself, it's like you're crying and laughing at the same time. So I think the arts are really important for leading cultural change, and which eventually leads to policy changes, like how what represents the professional artist, or represents I guess Canadian content. That's what can shift with more content that's available by us and for us.
Thank you so much, Jax, for sharing that as well. And so in terms of trying to really highlight the achievements in our community, I'm very happy that you mentioned the Tita Collective. I follow them too. Attendees, if you don't know who the Tita Collective is, look them up. They're very active on Facebook, and they do make you laugh. And they're young Filipina Canadian comedians based out of Toronto, and they're great. In terms of the arts, we also have Catherine Hernandez as well, and I think that many of us are fans of hers, playwright, an amazing playwright and novelist as well. So we do have many artists also nurture and to look up to in our community. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I wanted to move on to Darla, Ate Francia, and Laarni in terms of your take in your concerns within your industry and your communities before COVID-19. You're all working as social workers or immigration consultants. So if you could share with us your thoughts. And I'll point it out to Laarni right now. Maybe you can share first.
Hi, hello everyone. Thanks, Charlene. Magandang hapon po. I am Laarni and I am a clinical counselor. And based on my industry, even before COVID, I feel very strongly about family and youth mental health. And one of the biggest challenges I have experienced, I have observed based on where I'm working, is really there's I think there's a shift in the dynamics of the Filipino family, specifically those who have been reunited after such a long time. And that has had tremendous effects on not just the children, not just the teenagers, but also the parents. So that has been one of the most pressing issues I feel that I have experienced. So that's number one. And since we don't normally talk about our concerns, a lot of us just keep it to ourselves. So it's rare for Filipino families to reach out and to seek help. They would mostly feel that this is just for us. They limit it to family. So that is a problem. And because of that, there's also they stigmatize mental illness a lot. So it's very common for a lot of Filipino parents to tell their children, even with a diagnosis of depression, to tell them that okay lang yan, uminom ka ng tubig, drink water, and you'll feel better. Maglakad tayo, let's go outside, let's exercise. So it's quite common, and it can be a bit frustrating. I remember I worked with a grandma, a lola, who did not want her granddaughter to take any of her medications. And I remember talking to her and asking her, what about you? Do you take any medications? Opo, meron daw for, I think for high cholesterol and blood pressure. So I was telling her about what would happen to you if you don't take the medicines. And then she would say, oh, that's impossible. I'm going to die. I can't do that. So I was explaining how it would work for her grandchild too, and eventually, well, she eventually gave her grandchild the medicine. So that's one. And another pressing concern is, I think most of us would agree, Jax already spoke about it, it's the lack of representation. I feel a bit frustrated whenever there are events or whenever we we offer certain activities or certain programs, a lot of the different services for free. A lot of the Filipinos don't really feel comfortable accepting any of the services. So they're all, okay lang kami, we're okay, kaya namin, we can do this. So that can be quite frustrating. Even if we are like top 3 in the past 10 years, whenever there are events, I rarely see Filipino families who make the most out of the services being provided for them. And it can be a bit frustrating. So those are some of the concerns that I have noticed. So I will pass it on to Ate Francia.
And actually, our our profession is connected. So I'm a registered social worker here, but I do family violence counseling. Um, Prior to this position, I work as a cultural broker. So I'm actually attached to children's services, and I provide the cultural interpretation. And this is the big problem now with the system, because they so one big concern is the inappropriate discipline and how we raise our children now that they are in Canada. They think that they can still use the same discipline that we can use back home. And so a lot of the families or parents are struggling to manage their children. They think that the government tied up their hands by in disciplining the children, or they are, as Oswald Laarni has just said, they don't want to share it with other people. It's secreto. When we do things at home, it's secret. And secret is not good, because when kids go out and talk about it, and so they get involved with the police, they get involved with children's services, and then we have a problem. So just to let you know that in Calgary, we have the highest number of families who are involved among the ethnocultural group. And is that good? I think at some point it's good, because then Filipino families are able to express their needs. They can call police because of the language that we have as well, that we are good in English. But at the same time, that shows as well some of the problems that we have. I mean, Laarni has just said, family reunification has a big impact on the children and the parents. So the attachment and the relationship. And so one of the things that I do is also family violence counseling. And so we have a lot of Filipino families who are having problems. And this is not just, I think it's domestic violence is across the board. It's not just Filipino families, but specifically for our Filipino families, we can see some of the pattern, the trends, the issues that are coming because of either, and mostly finances, the money that we are sending back home. Parents don't agree how much money goes to kamag-anak or in-laws back home. And also because of that separation, they don't know each other. They start to get to know each other, and they are not prepared that after 10 years, they will get back together, not actually knowing that person that she loves and she lived with 10 years ago are now different. And so we are, and that's the pre-COVID situation for me. We'll talk about the COVID later on maybe. And then I think Darla will be the next one. Darla?
And Darla is on mute right now, so hopefully she will unmute herself.
Okay, there.
Welcome,
Okay.
Darla.
Hopefully I get the hang of this by the end of the event. Okay. All right. So a lot of the issues that you mentioned, they sound very familiar. Yeah. For me, it's precarious employment. A lot of women have precarious employment, immigration status, domestic violence is a big one, racism, employer abuse. Now, reunification issues is a huge one because a lot of caregivers, when they leave the Philippines, their child is 2 years old, and it's not like they, they come to Canada and after 2 years they get their families. No, a lot of caregivers go through Hong Kong or Taiwan even before they come to Canada. So it's like 6 to 10 years before they actually get together. So the 2-year-old boy who she left is now a young man, but she still treats him like a 2-year-old, right? And a lot of caregivers, they complain to me that it's so hard to do parenting via Skype. Of course it is, right? And that's what they're doing now, is parenting via Skype. Another issue too is domestic violence. If the husband does make it here, and I can tell you right now, I can count on my hands the number of caregiver families that are intact, even among my friends. Only a few are able to bring their whole family over. Either they separate, or the husband goes on to, goes on with his life. But for those who do come and are intact, they finalize the separation here, which is kind of sad too, right? So a lot of the husbands, and they've complained to me too, the husbands too, like, I can't adjust, right? They're so used to living back home where somebody's cooking for you, you don't have to do anything, and all of a sudden you're here, and of course your wife is doing 2 jobs. Of course you have to do the laundry, right? You can't expect her to come home and do the laundry too. So there's a lot of problems with the adjustment, right? And in terms of seeking help, I find that with the Filipino community, it's hard to get them to come try to get help. It's nakakahiya, right? I guess because I remember back home, if I need money, I go to my rich uncle. If I'm sick, I go to my cousin who's a doctor. So it's that was our safety net, right? We don't go to, unlike here where you have to go to social services and whatnot, right? Nakakahiya nga, right? I don't know those people, nakakahiya. And it's Filipino. That's why sometimes I ask them right away, are you comfortable working with, Filipina? I'm Filipina. Are you comfortable with that? Because sometimes it's a small, people know people, especially with domestic violence issues, right? People know people. And when I was working at one time with domestic violence issues, I always have to make sure that the woman that I had a counseling session with goes out the other way before my other one comes in, that they don't meet each other, right? Because it's confidential, right? It's such a small community. But I think that's how Filipinos are set up. We have our own network when we need help, right? We're not used to going to the government. And then I always say, well, that's what it's set up. It's for you, right? That's where our taxes go. So go, use it, right? Otherwise, if you don't use it, then they'll say, well, there's no need for that in the Filipino community. And I'm like, no. Yeah, unlike Eastern European women I've worked with in the past where they demand government services, I guess because they're used to that kind of, the government where they provide everything, services for you. So that's, I think that's, yeah. I think I'm going to stop there. I can go on and on, but I'll stop there for now.
All right, thank you, Darla. Just to give a shout out and a welcome to those who recently joined our discussion here. We have Julie, Frank, Kiana, Jay, hi Rocio, if that's who I think it is, and Stephanie, and hello Phoebe, you're here, and Cecilia as well. So thank you for joining our discussion. We are about 50 minutes into the discussion. For those who just joined us, we are recording this, so we will be posting this later on, hopefully by tomorrow morning. If you happen to miss the first part, or if you need to actually leave, but please stay because this discussion is getting really quite good. But just to wrap up, we were discussing and asking our panelists, what were your concerns in your industries and communities before COVID-19? And everybody shared in terms of precarious work, family separation, also representation in the arts as well, and also domestic violence that Darla was also just sharing with us. I also just wanted to note that Ati Francia actually mentioned it, and it's good to note that in terms of our community, many cities have said that in terms of family separation of the domestic workers and their children, that the average is supposed to be about 10 years. But there was a case in Montreal where a woman was actually separated from her daughter for 20 years. So, or almost 20 years, about 17 years. Her daughter was 2 when this woman left the Philippines, and she was able to sponsor her daughter when her daughter was 19 years old. So it's actually, for some cases, extreme cases, it's more than 10 years. 10 years, 5 years, 2 years is even a lot. So again, it's good that we're discussing the current situation in our community and also what's been happening for the last few decades, because it doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. But what was really interesting with La Arnie, as she was discussing in terms of the families that she works with, and in terms of, and Ati Francia as well talked about the disciplinary actions in terms of how do the families deal with this? How do they raise children who are now here in Canada? So I think it's a good segue in terms of the question that we want to also get into, that we mentioned earlier, in terms of decolonizing our community. And to do that is to really look at the colonial mentality and how it plays really in our community. It's a big question. It's very complicated. I think that there's going to be a lot of agreements and also disagreements, but hopefully this will be a good starting point. But I wanted to really throw out the question in terms of how does this colonial mentality that our community has, and how does it impact how we relate to with each other as a community, within our own families, and then within our communities, and also with how we relate to our families that we left behind in the Philippines. So a big question, and I think it might touch on in terms of internalized racism, anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity, and also lateral violence. It's a lot. So if we can't touch on all of it, I don't want all of our panelists and our attendees to panic, because I think that those are very big issues. But let's get started with the colonial mentality discussion. And I'm going to let one of our panelists start it off.
I can go. There's one book that totally changed my trajectory of exploring identity, which was E.J.R. David's Brown Skin, White Minds, and it opened the doors on talking about Psikologiyang Filipino and discovering the colonial mentality of Filipinos. And the work of Virgilius Enriquez, I might be saying backwards, but the colonial mentality that we brought with us, whether it's our parents bringing it here and then kind of like just shoving it into our faces, like subtly, around anti-indigeneity, anti-Blackness, colorism, classicism, has impacted how we navigate whiteness, how we navigate spaces here as settlers, and how we even see the land. Because it really is a displacement, first, being here, coming here, and first with the colonial mentality of not recognizing, for the people who weren't part of the movement or weren't doing the work before they got here, like survival jobs and survival subsistence was only confined to just, working, making money and taking care of the kids, and not really examining how we relate to where we are. I once asked, I don't know if I should say, well, I just once asked a parent if we were Indigenous, if we had Indigenous blood from the Philippines, and they said, there's no way. But I'm like, how is that possible? Because we're all Indigenous. We just don't know. We only know 3 generations back. Like the people here, when they do family trees, they have like a tall vertical tree, and we have like a flat, wide bush. So that only goes 2 generations deep. As far as coming here also with the waves of immigration where mostly professionals came in, the model minority myth was set up to serve as a racial wedge between indigenous people and Asians and Black folks. So like, I think you might have seen the Hassan Minhaj video where he talks about like July 2nd, 1964, Martin Luther King worked with Lyndon B. Johnson to sign the Civil Rights and Labor Act that changed how migration came over. And we also, Canada, benefited from the waves of immigration from Asia. And that also shifted how the labor market looked like. Darla's presentation on how many people were professionals, like the majority were professionals who were here and arrived in the 60s and 70s. And that definitely set up this myth of model minority. But then it's also looking at how we, as Filipinos with our colonial mentalities, that we are, some of us, we're beginning the process of decolonizing and examining how we relate to whiteness, how we relate to white supremacy. It's unpacking this internalized racism, internalized these values that aren't aligned with Kapwa, the indigenous core values. Hiya was a colonial concept that Virgilius spoke of to explain why there's such a stigma on mental health, why there's such a stigma on not being educated, why we have all these hierarchies. And it's, even though it's part of how we also wait before you tell us, like, now anybody can talk, we're just waiting for you to like go pointing, and like turning off our mics off mute. Like, we need to be invited in, we need to be intentionally invited so that we have space to speak. So I think right now, with many movements of doing anti-racist work, anti-Black racism work, it really has to begin with healing our own traumas around colonization and our relationship to how we see ourselves in our skin, because like, you can't buy a bar soap without skin whitening in the Philippines. And I think, unless if it's Dove or Ivory, right? So I think we need to really examine how we see ourselves so that we can be better allies and better accomplices. It's that internal work that will make the allyship authentic. Otherwise it is performative. And although we do need to write letters and stop Bill 1, but in Alberta, but and also defund the police. But we don't have Black Lives Matter chapter in Calgary yet. I just think that the internal work needs to begin. I hope that wasn't over 2 minutes.
Thanks, Jax.
Thank you, Jax.
And I think I'll go next. But I love being a Filipino. There are so many good things about being a Filipino. We're resilient, we're ingenious, we're hardworking, we're family oriented. There are so many things that makes it so great to be a Filipino, but there are also a lot of, we have to admit, being a Filipino, there are also certain things which are not so nice. I remember I was talking to a friend who told me, bakit ang hirap mahalin ng Pilipinas? So that's why is it so hard to be in love and to stay in love with the Philippines, or the idea that I am a Filipino? And for me, that was a very difficult question. I did not answer her question. A very counselor approach is, well, you're the only one who can answer that. So that was a very counselor approach. But it's very interesting how when we're here, when we're talking about colonial mentality, and this is fine, probably for a lot of us who are here, this is a realization of what we have always dreamt about ever since we were young. And I'm not really sure, but when we're talking about being in a new place, being an immigrant here in Canada, and we're talking about displacement can take can take various forms. It can be external physical displacement. We're not in our territory anymore. It can be internal displacement as well. And I feel that for a lot of Filipinos, we have a very poor sense of collective identity. It's a bit vague in terms of understanding who we really are as a culture. I feel that because of that, that's also probably one of the reasons why our adaptation can take forms in various ways. Some people may adapt by assimilating the culture completely. other Filipinos who are here, they don't, they rebel, they go against what's supposed to be. Oh, this is what Canadian life is supposed to be. So, and because of that, the way that we how would you say, or the way that we socialize, the way that we solidify with indigenous people, Black people, it becomes difficult as well, because we are searching for our own collective identity, and at the same time we are either that, or we are so enmeshed in their identity that we totally forget who we are. And I guess that's also the reason behind some people being indifferent, I would say, to a lot of issues that we have here, or even a lot of issues that we have in the Philippines. I guess that one of the traits I love most about being Filipino is masayahin tayo, we're always happy, but at the same time we mask a lot of, a lot of our feelings too. So that can be quite frustrating. But yeah, and I guess because Jax was talking about Enriquez, I remember how he mentioned that Filipinos are notorious for their lack of self-reflection. We find it hard to self-reflect. We find it morbid, which is probably why we have big ideas. We think big, and I love that. But we also fail to think deep, which can be a problem. But I still love being a Filipino. So, yeah. Okay.
I'll
Thank you,
probably,
Larnie, for that colorful insight. Definitely a lot to jump into. So I think we've got Ati Francia, who's going to be talking now and sharing her thoughts. But again, I just wanted to let the attendees know that you can post questions in the Q&A box, and we will read out some of your questions later on. In about half an hour or so, we will get to the Q&A. So Ati Francia, take it away.
no, I just want to support what Arne was saying, but make it simpler on the day-to-day work that I see, and a lot of the Filipino families that I've met. Sa atin, for us, being foreigner, being maputi, maganda. Being white is beautiful. Everything that is not Filipino made are actually better, right? So even our kids, when they arrive here, we don't want them to speak Tagalog. And that's okay. I think if that's the choice, but it's important for them to be connected with their culture. Not all our culture are bad, and as Laarni was saying, madami tayong magagandang qualities and values that we have to keep. We have so many good qualities and values that we have to keep, and we should not be embarrassed. We don't feel proud to become Filipino, and I don't know. I just feel that my son grew up in the UK and here, and he's not Filipino, but he often will say to me, "I want to be a Filipino, mom." And he will say, "I am potato. I am white outside, brown and and white inside." However, it's very, very important for him that he knows where he came from. He knows the Filipino values. We need to teach our children that, because when they struggle in life, they go back to their core. And if their core is not complete and they're not clear, then that's when we have the big problem for them. Not most, but I think some of the families that I've met, they don't even want to be associated with other Filipinos, or their children. They don't want to mix with other Filipino children, and that's kind of sad. Not to speak Tagalog, not to be associated. It's really, for me, disheartening to see some Filipino families and some kids who are growing up in Canada being in that situation. Yeah, thank you.
Does anybody want to start off then? We've got Nellie and Darla. So it looks like we are getting to the discussion where maybe there's going to be some cultural differences within our community, and how that also really impacts our development, our advancement, and also how do we address that within the context of colonial mentality. I think, Darla, you can take it away.
Mentality, yeah. Yeah, I think when we talk about colonization, we talk about it in the past tense, which is not. I mean, it's still inherent, the way how we're treated, in our everyday lives, how people treat us, how we treat others. Colonization is very, very inherent. It's they have euphemisms for it now: globalization, imperialism, right? Capitalism. They're all one and the same. Colonial mentality, I think, yeah, 300 years of Spanish rule, right? We were in the convent for 300 years, and then followed up by the Americans, and we found ourselves in Hollywood. So that's why we're so confused. We're very religious, yet we like karaoke, right? So we're both religious and we like the Hollywood part of it. And what I can say about colonial mentality is it starts when you're young. I mean, even your parents suffer from it, right? So of course that's what they pass on to you, right? I remember playing in the sun and saying, no, get in, you're gonna get dark. Dark is not good. Have less employment opportunities, less prospects for marriage, so on and so forth, right? Yeah, I mean, even to this day, when they ask for, employers ask for resumes, they want you to, which is against the law here in Canada, thank God, they want you to staple a picture of yourself. They even put in their ads, they want women who are fair-skinned, 5'4", 5'5", right? It's still inherent there, very, very inherent. So I think it's gonna take a lot of unlearning, right? All of that, a lot of, because a lot of it is internalized already. And somebody mentioned skin whitening, big industry, big money is being made out of skin whitening. Again, how can we work in solidarity with indigenous peoples here when we treat our own indigenous peoples back home like crap, right? I remember growing up and my friends would laugh at an Igorot man was wearing a bahag, right? Yeah, and to this day I still remember that, and I'm like, oh, that's how we treated our indigenous. So how are we to work in solidarity with indigenous people here when we ourselves cannot work in solidarity with our own indigenous peoples back home, right? We're not doing anything. Their lands are being stolen. Mining companies are taking over their lands. Lot of what do you call this? Even Canadian mining companies are there taking over their lands. A lot of landslides, log strip mining is going on, okay? And yeah, women, children, people are losing their lives over this because come rainy season, because of the strip mining, and the trees are all gone down too, when in fact years ago it wasn't a problem. Now it is, because there's a lot of landslides that are happening now. A lot of people are displaced, right? So yeah, here we are trying to work in solidarity with indigenous people here, yet in our own, back home, yeah, we don't even pay attention to what's going on there. What else can I say about colonial mentality? Yeah, so there's, like I said, a lot of unlearning that needs to go on. A lot of internalized racism that's happening. For some reason, I don't know, we hate brown skin, which we shouldn't. And I think it starts with relearning, re-educating, right? I think that's all I can say for now. I think everybody else said.
All right, thank you so much, Darla. We've got Nellie here to share her thoughts on colonial mentality and how that also impacts our community and how we relate then to our families back in the Philippines. So Nellie, if you could give us some insight, that would be great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I echo a lot of what the panelists have shared before me. And I guess really quickly, when I think about the question about colonial mentality, I also think about how Filipino migration is a system of displacement. And it's really due to the undeveloped economic conditions of the Philippines. And people are forced to leave in search of elsewhere. And it's also important for me to share that for us and Gabriela, we believe and say that it's displacement because working Filipinos don't want to leave their families and their lives back home. And they're forced to do that because there's a lack of jobs in the industry and the economic exploitation. So under the labor export policy, mass forced migration is institutionalized. And just to add a little bit to what Darla mentioned earlier about the land in the Philippines being used for mining purposes, the reason why we have these roots of economic underdevelopment in the Philippines, which force people to leave, is that these lands are being plundered by imperialist countries such as the so-called United States, so-called Canada, which should be properly called Turtle Island. And the United States can exploit these resources, lands, cheap labor, and other so-called underdeveloped countries like the Philippines because of its historic oppression of Black people through chattel slavery and the genocide and removal of indigenous folks from their traditional lands. And I guess just to connect it quickly to how it comes to Turtle Island, so the dispossession and displacement of indigenous peoples and mining projects in the Philippines serve the same settler colonial drive for money for the United States and so-called Canada. And it's also important to reflect that when we think about resisting economic exploitation and acknowledging that settler colonialism has made global plundering of these Philippine natural resources a possibility. We need to commit to standing in solidarity with other folks who are oppressed and exploited. And it also comes down to thinking about why are they leaving their homeland in the first place? Because not everyone wants to leave. So that's just my first thought on that question. And to bring it back into the overarching topic of this panel, which was, COVID-19 and anti-racism, I guess I like to think about it in this way that, COVID-19 has exposed how capitalism is not only unequipped to deal with that pandemic, but capitalism exploits anything, especially during a pandemic. And this happens, and we can see it through Duterte's government. Duterte has responded with increased militarization and police, such as by punishing folks who violate community quarantine measures. And people are forced to leave their homes in search of work, food, and supplies because Duterte's government isn't giving them any aid to survive. I know that with some Gabriela chapters in the Philippines, they have set up their own soup kitchens, their own initiatives in their own barangays to really take care of one another because unfortunately Duterte isn't providing that support. And instead of providing this comprehensive aid, the government's trying to push PhilHealth, which is a mandatory health coverage, which will exact high premiums from migrant workers who already receive healthcare as workers in their host countries. So when you think about it, Duterte is trying to get more money from overseas foreign workers who may earn a little bit more than what they would earn in the Philippines, but consider that they also send remittances back home. So they will barely have enough to make their own living expenses. And this is a sacrifice that they make for their own future because Duterte isn't able to provide that in the Philippines. So at a time when migrant workers need help amidst job mass losses, the government continues just to treat people as cash cows. And another recent development, which I'm sure some of us might have heard about, is Duterte's rushing to approve the anti-terror bill. And it's a really big bill which accuses anyone who is criticizing the government of being a terrorist. And under this bill, human rights defenders, activists, and even the youth who are learning about these issues and are speaking out can be red tagged as terrorists. So I guess to kind of bring it together, as Filipinos on Turtle Island and around so-called North America, we're grappling with financial burdens, racism internally and externally within our own community and our workplaces, particularly for women migrant workers, and economic exploitation under COVID. Our families and people back home are being subjected to Duterte's fascist policies, which show signs and remnants of martial law. So it's important to mention that when we support our families and the economy back in the Philippines through the remittances that we send, it's only for the government to neglect and brutalize them. So there's this cycle of oppression that continues, and I'm trying to remember what the question is, but I guess it shows, it's a big question that you asked, Charlene, but I guess I hope that shows how you know, the struggles that we're facing back here are connected to the issues back home, because we can, you know, Filipino folks continue to be facing the brunt end of what COVID has exposed, which is especially for women migrant workers who are frontline essential workers.
Thank you, Nellie. No worries about forgetting what the question was, because it is a big one. We are discussing quite a lot of issues here, and we can't get to them all. I just wanted to do a time check and just let our attendants know that we have about 15 minutes left before we start getting into the Q&A. It looks like many of you are submitting questions, so thank you very much. We're going to try to get as many as we can in. So we'll have about a 25-minute Q&A at about 6:30 Vancouver time. So we are going to do that, but I think that I just wanted to move on to a couple more questions before, and I think that, you know, unfortunately we have a lot of really great questions that we formulated, and also a lot of really great answers. But just to sum up the discussion in terms of the colonial mentality, you know, we've got one of the big questions that I think, Jax, you came out in terms of, you know, how do we overcome the colonial mentality to be better allies as well? You touched on that. And I think Larnie, you also touched on that as well, in terms of our identity crisis, I think really impacts that. So I guess like one of the last couple of questions before we get into the Q&A is, some of you have already touched upon it, is we have a lot to work with in our community. There's a lot of work to do. And we're not going to be able to address it all in our webinar. However, you know, this is for all of you. You don't all have to answer if you don't want to, but how do we overcome our colonial mentality? Ati Francia, you also touched upon it a little bit. How do you think that we should, how do we overcome it? How do we begin to overcome the colonial mentality in our community to become better allies, especially in during the current political environment that we're having right now? It's really important. I think that many members in our community are trying to do that, but it's a big challenge. So how do we do that? And again, anybody could jump in who'd like to tackle this question. We don't also have to answer it all, but just to throw it out there, how do we overcome our colonial mentality to become better allies?
I can just throw something out there. It won't be that long, but I've been listening to a podcast by Resma Manikem, who's a trauma therapist, talk about how white body supremacy affects all people, whether you're white, whether you're BIPOC, because it defines a certain standard of what we aspire to, and that attachment has created has impacted our communities, but also impacted white people in that they haven't defined what white culture is. Like, white culture has been, like in the North American Turtle Island sense, is based on colonization, settler colonialism, extraction, consumerism, appropriation, capitalism, everything that's oppressive, and they need, like, and then we as people who have tried to assimilate, have tried to assimilate, often can identify with whiteness, whether it's proximity or whether it's like the erasure of our own language, or even not knowing about Babayan until like 3 years ago. I didn't know about it. I thought we were illiterate before colonization. And it's the healing that is the path to being better allies, because I think whether you're white, whether you're BIPOC or racialized, the healing is what's going to get us through to be authentically understanding our positionality, whether it's privilege, whether it's being oppressed, because then it creates a path. And Manikem says that, like, white people need to just heal themselves. Like, forget about us. Like, take care of yourselves. Define your culture, heal, and then we can also have space for ourselves too. So it's not like white saviorism, like, you know, but I think the healing part and will lead to defining our culture as well. So we can have space to do that in our art. I've seen in some of the questions here, how do we, like, what characters would appeal to us so that we can define our culture. For children, write your stories. Don't worry about what's marketable, because anything that like represents your story is something that we would see, we would find ourselves reflected in, because we don't see it. Like, we were shoved, like Friends, that kind of vacuous, vapid type of media was shoved in our faces, and we're supposed to like identify with that. Anything that you create where it's your story and it's not a pantomime or like ventriloquism of somebody else's identity, that's how we'll heal. That's part of our identity building. I don't know if that answered colonial mentality, but
Thank you, Jax. Do we have anybody else in our panel would like to jump in? Okay, we've got Nellie.
Yeah, I like what you shared, Jax, about the healing aspect. And when you were sharing that, I was actually thinking about myself. I know that we all have different ways of healing, and art is one of them. And I know that for me, it was really becoming more involved and learning more about the political history of the Philippines. Like, what does it mean to be Filipinx? Just because I've been so isolated, and I have moved around a lot. So I was trying to figure out that part of my identity. And I guess like one example, when I think about what does healing look like, you know, it could look like joining a Filipino women's organization like Gabriela, and learning about the militant history of the Philippines, thinking about what it means to, you know, elevate and advance the political consciousness of Filipinx women, and standing in solidarity with other workers of the world. And it can look like refusing to accept policies that further oppress women, working class family, and immigrants. It's really important to recognize that our struggles are ultimately tied to one another, as is our liberation. And I think, and I'm also I'm a proud political science nerd. Like, I really love looking to policy analysis, and this is what really makes me like really fascinated about the world. So the second point is, it's also our duty to raise the analysis on the issue of on issues that affect women. So when I think about the issue of violence against women, I guess from Gabriela's standpoint, it would be expanding it beyond a gender issue and highlighting the economic, the political, and the cultural aspects by connecting how imperialism perpetuates and worsens violence against women in all forms. So that's my insight when I think about how do we attack a colonial mentality and deconstruct it.
Great, thank you, Nellie. We have just a few minutes before we start our Q&A, and I wanted to squeeze in one more question. We can, hopefully we'll be able to have more discussions. I think Larnie, did you want to throw in one more thing before we move on?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just because it's ironic that the word colony is from the Latin word farmer. Yeah. So I was just thinking about how when we deal about colonialism or colonial mentality, I love the words healing, and you add it to the word intention. So there should be an intention to heal. And just like a farmer, we start small, you know, and this is very practical. We start with our thoughts. It's simply affirming that I am broken. You know, I'm not perfect. I need help. But at the same time, recognizing that it's there. And we start building up on that. I need help. Yes. You know, I am not worthless. So there is hope. There are people around me who can help. And even these thoughts, you know, when we end up affirming ourselves, it's self-affirmations every day, we end up believing in these thoughts. I am a firm believer in that, honestly. It's recognizing that I am broken, but, you know, there's hope for me. Yes, I come from a country where colonial mentality is big, it's huge, but, you know, I can do something about it. We start with those thoughts. I feel it's just recognizing and affirming that there's something that we can do about it, and we can always start with ourselves. And I would love to share that it has to be an intentional healing on our part. So it has to be very intentional. It's very difficult because we're going against a very big system, and sometimes we can feel so hopeless. But if it starts, with just probably me or maybe even Nelly today, then it's still a start, right? So yeah, I just wanted to share that. Thanks.
Can I add something as well? Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're conditioned to believe that we're different, and therefore we're inferior. And it comes from. I mean, I went to a Catholic school, and being made to kneel in front of a statue of Virgin Mary who's white, and saints that are white, that does something to you, right? It does something to your psyche. That really does something to you. And it's something that we have to fight every day. And then we come to Canada, and then we're made to feel like we have to be grateful that we're here. And I think it needs to start within our own Filipino community. I remember attending an orientation once by a settlement worker, Filipino settlement worker. And she was saying, oh, you're all lucky to be here in Canada. And shouldn't it be the other way around? Canada is lucky to have me here. Canada did not spend a penny on my education, did not spend a cent on my airfare, on my settlement funds, didn't spend a penny on me. And who gets to use my skills? Canada, right? So it should be the other way around, right? Canada is lucky to have us here. And I think that's the mentality that we need to start having, right, as Filipinos. And it needs to start in our own communities, even within our own leaders. Sometimes we look up to our leaders, our elders, and they're the ones who are sometimes, even bringing us down. Like, oh no, we don't. They're like, oh no, we don't need Filipino workers. We understand English, right? Yeah, we do, but the context is different, right? For example, reunification issues. A mom who's having issues with her daughter, they're just, bonding now, is different from a mainstream mom having an issue with her teenage daughter. Totally different, right? And yeah, there needs to be social workers, and I know we're working on that, and counselors that need to be aware. And what they're saying is, oh, we need more Filipino counselors, more Filipino social. Well, why don't you teach that in UBC, reunification issues, so that it's just not Filipino counselors or Filipino teachers, it's mainstream social workers or counselors who become aware of these issues as well, right? So it's not just Filipinos that, and sometimes families want to work with somebody not from their community, right? So that would come in handy if, some of these mainstream social workers are aware of the issues that we're facing in the Filipino community, right? I mean, we learn about their culture, they should learn about ours, about our issues. They created it, right? No, Globalization 101.
All right, thank you so much, Darla. So we've gathered some of the questions that our participants, thank you so much, have submitted. But before we get into that, before we get into the Q&A, where the attendees are going to be able to voice their opinions and questions, I just wanted to ask one closing question before we move on from this part of the discussion. COVID-19 has really exposed a lot of things, a lot, how unprepared many countries have been, the inequalities, the systemic oppression. It's really blown everything up in terms of really the problems that the entire world is now grappling with in terms of economic, to the environment, to healthcare. So I would like to ask the panelists, again, not everybody, if you feel that you've already answered this question or that you've already touched on it, you don't need to, because we can move on to the Q&A. But I would like to put forward, with COVID-19 exposing so many things about the world and also repositioning our community back into the spotlight again, in terms of, just as an example, the number of Filipino healthcare workers that have passed away around the world. The United States, the UK, and the Philippines have extremely high numbers. The UK has over 40 Filipino healthcare workers that have passed away. The Philippines has over 45. The United States has about 50 Filipino healthcare workers that have passed away. So all of these problems have been thrust into the spotlight. How do we as a community move on from this? How do we empower ourselves and and learn from these, from this and move on. Mind you, we can also get to this in the Q&A. So who would like to throw in their bit in terms of this question?
I can start if no one's like super eager to jump in yet. So I'll make it quick to honor the Q&A period with our lovely audience. So the first thing I thought of, Charlene, to your question is you can't build a movement by yourself. A movement requires many people. So it's really important to be a part of an organization that's doing the work to address, to address the ways that imperialism and capitalism affect our Filipino livelihood. It can be impacted in so many ways, but I want to honor our time right here. So when I think about like what type of Filipino orgs to join, I think about Bayan affiliated organizations, and Bayan is an anti-imperialist alliance of 30 grassroots Filipino organizations fighting for genuine sovereignty and democracy in the Philippines. And some examples of Bayan affiliated organizations are Gabriela, BC, other Gabriela chapters throughout Canada. There's also Sulong UVC, who is affiliated with Anak Bayan Canada, and also Migrante VC. There are a few more out there, but the main point is join a Filipino organization that's doing the work. And another point is just to also think about joining a mutual aid network for Filipinos. And we have one that's called Kapit Bisig. And I'm talking about it here just because, in this time of COVID, there's a lot of isolation that folks experience. So having a mutual aid network where folks can connect with each other for resources and support each other would make it it'll make the pain of going through COVID easier, because it's not just about providing material support, but also the personal outreach and the physical support. So those are two things that came to mind when you shared that question.
Great. So Ate Francia, you can go ahead and say your bit.
Yeah, no, I think we need to be caring to one another. We need to look after each other. And during this COVID, our group focus on the most vulnerable group. And these are the Filipinos who are undocumented. Everyone is allowed to get CERB, EI, and benefits from the government. But we know that there are few kababayans that actually don't have the access to the government support, right? We know there are few, maybe a lot. We don't know most of them, but in Calgary, where we have our group, we try to help. We actually thought about who's the most vulnerable in this group. Most of us are working, and if we don't have a job, we are allowed to get CRB. But our kababayans who don't have documents, they're actually not allowed to get sick, because they are not allowed to. They don't have money. They don't have a health services. They have to pay. They don't have a money that they can get from the government. They cannot work under the table because there's no jobs available at that time. So I think we need to really focus on looking after each other and ensuring that walang naiiwan, walang naiiwanan, right? We need to be together. We need to work together. We need to look after each other. I just want to mention, and I don't want to miss this, because when Charlene was saying there's this Filipinos are actually on the news, but in Calgary, in Alberta, High River is actually an outbreak here. We are the epicenter of COVID, where a lot of the Filipino workers are working at the Cargill, and 80% of the workers there, out of the 2,000, are Filipinos, and most of them are affected by COVID. And there was a lot of media attention and some blaming in terms of bakit kasi we live together, like 3 families in one home. Why do you have to do? You already know that there's COVID. You're still taking their carpooling because it's quite far from the city. And we need to stand up for them. We need to, some of our members in our group have to be interviewed on the media and explain why is it that we have to help each other. Bakit we have to stay in one house? Why do we have to do carpooling? Especially those who are temporary foreign workers, who most of them don't have families here. Of course, they will live together, right? That's part of our supporting each other. And so I think it's important that we have to speak for those people who don't have the words. And I know that Cesar Kala, who has been our one of our members here, have had to be interviewed on media so many times just to say this is how we are. It's not because we are mahirap at wala tayo, we don't think about other people, but that's how we are, as how we support each other. And so I think it's important for us to understand it. This is where we can only pass this by helping each other and not blaming each other. I think that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ate Francia. We are going to now, thank you so much. I know that we could keep going on with this because it is a big topic. It's funny, for the attendees, when we were organizing this, we were thinking it was just going to be an hour and a half discussion, then we decided 2 hours to allot more time for discussion, but it seems like 2 hours is also not enough time. But I also wanted to remind the attendees that you should have been emailed an option to join the post-show discussions. If you have more questions, if you have some feelings that you would like to also share, maybe not demand emotional labor from our panelists, but to also, if you have something that you would also like to share and really need to get it off your chest, there is a chica time after the webinar, so you can join in as well. So we'd like to move on to the Q&A from our audience. We have just under 20 minutes for the discussion, for the Q&A. Many of you have sent in questions. There was about almost 30 questions sent. Thank you so much. So we'll try to get through to some of them. But one of the first questions that actually was posted, I think just like 15 minutes after we started, was from Eileen Santiago. And Eileen, I don't know. Oh, it looks like you're still here. So you've been waiting very patiently. So your question is there a reason why most of the women who migrated or most of the people who migrated here are women? And so I think I'd like to throw that question out to either to both Ati Francia and also to Darla, and also Nelly, if you would like to jump in there as well. Mind you, we also have a time limit, so let's get on with that.
Yeah. I think correct me if I'm wrong, I think she was referring to the slide that I had, 1967, where there is mostly females. And that's because there were 2,022 school teachers, physicians, nurses, accountants, science technicians who came in, and 345 nurses aides. So mostly women, usually nurses and school teachers. And I think that's why there's a huge number of females as opposed to males. That was in 1967. But in terms of immigration now, it's a little bit more equal, men and women, depending on which category. If you say caregivers, then it's mostly women. If you say highly skilled, a little bit more of the men. If it's construction work, then it's mostly men. Even immigration employment is genderized, right? Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Ate Francia, would you like to take that on?
No, I think that's the answer for that question. It depends on the kind of work. Mostly the living caregivers are women. But yeah, in the beginning of migration, mostly women because of the profession. So yeah, I think we just want to answer more questions. So yeah, thank you.
I'd also like to throw in there, I think that Darla has also touched in, is that really there were nurses, and I think that the trend of nurses in terms of our community is still something that's needed and wanted highly. So I mean, I grew up, my mother came here as a nurse. her friends all came here as a nurse. I grew up with nurses. I think there was an expectation that I was supposed to be a nurse, but I did not want to become a nurse. But you know, I know families whose parents came in the 1970s, and who have children who are my friends, and 3 of them are all nurses as well. So you could really see that, and it's still happening in terms of those who are coming in, preferably those who are living caregivers. They do have quite of a nursing background. So I think that migration is quite feminized. There is really that ideal in terms of looking at women coming in here. And I think that the majority of our community is still about 52% women who are coming in. So women have always really been the breadwinner in our community. So thank you for sharing. I don't know, Nellie, if you wanted to jump in as well, or if you think that we can move on to the next question.
We can move on.
Right. Okay. So we have a few more that we'd like to dive into. And so this one is actually, I think Laarni was asked to answer this question. And it's from Bella Cenizero. Oh, you're still here, Bella. Thank you for sticking around.
Bella.
So the question is, for families and individuals who don't ask for help, is that a sign of weakness or independence? Would it be more helpful to support them in their empowerment process so they can make their own decision in accessing what options are available out there for support? So interesting question. Laarni, take it away.
I feel that it really is, for a lot of Filipinos, the panlabas na anyo, our reputation is very, very important. So I feel that it really is a sign of independence and we are very resilient, as I've earlier mentioned. So this is really standing up for ourselves, really not wanting, it's not exactly, we don't want people involved, but it's really, I want to do something about my situation first. So for a lot of the families, I guess my line would be, sige po, mommy. Mommy, you can always reach out, okay? Please don't hesitate. If you feel that you're ready to reach out, you know who to call. And sometimes I feel na I'm being super makulit. So I would, every now and then, I would ask them, do you need information about services? Do you want me to share information about services? And for some reason, for some of them, if it gets to, a bit more challenging for them to handle, they would know how to reach out. So I think, but it is really a sign of our independence, of, we're very strong-willed. Malakas ang loob natin, coming to Canada, that's a very, this is really a leap of faith. So being here, I've been through so much, and a lot of the moms I have worked with, I will agree with Tita Darla, most of them are single moms and they have been away from their children for such a long time. They have gone through so much, and little things such as, I don't know how to apply for CERB. They wouldn't ask for help for that. Or my child is acting out. They wouldn't ask for help, with that. So I guess it's a sign of independence. But right now, I feel that if they know that, teka, kailangan ko ng break, I need a break, I need someone else to step in, I feel that for some of them, they would know who to call. So I guess even the title of this afternoon session, Tara, Usap tayo, it's an invitation really to communicate and to reach out. So I feel that even if I'm makulit, no, so for some, they've probably blocked me already, and they registered my email address as spam already. But I will keep on asking them and sending information, just so they would never lose sight of, well, she's there, or there are people who are around. So I guess that's what we've been doing, and I hope that it builds empowerment for them as well. So yeah.
Can I add to that? What I found that's helpful in the Filipino community, especially Filipino women, is support groups, because then they take charge of the group, they empower themselves, and they can see that they're not the only ones who are dealing with these issues, right? It's like, oh, ikaw rin pala. Naku, akala ko ako lang. Akala ko na ano na yung ulo ko. Yung pala, ano, so that's what I found very helpful in my work is the community support groups. And they and yeah, eventually they take charge of it. They're like, they don't need me anymore. They're like just going, you know, scheduling their support groups and everything, and it extends to the family, the children as well, especially women who are escaping abuse. I had the support group one time, and one woman was saying, you know, "Sa totoo lang, I was so tired, pagod na pagod ako, I didn't want to come. But my daughter was crying. She wanted to come because she had playmates there, right? And they find support in each other as well. These children, they see that their mom has support, and they feel, you know, a little bit better because they have children that they play with as well, and they know that mom is okay with her, you know, with her support group. So that I find that very helpful is support groups, because they take charge of it, and it empowers them as well.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I think I mentioned this to Tita Darla before, and I maybe even some of the attendees. I was jokingly saying I wanted to use chismis, rumors, you know, as a form of catharsis for Filipino women. Because you know, with the right amount of training, how do we use chismis? No, in allowing us to feel better about our situation, no, not really negatively, but that might be because Tita Darla has been a very strong advocate. Let's bring the Filipinos together. You know, that's always a great way. You know, a sports fest. Naalala ko yung Tita Darla mentioned that sports fest, any fiesta. Just an opportunity and an invitation for people to know that they are supported and they're not alone. That would be really great. So yun lang po. I just remembered.
Thank you, Arnie and Darla. I absolutely agree with you. I mean, there's some, you know, I think that we just have to admit, we all know this. We are a very chismis community. Sometimes it's fun when you're the center of it, sometimes it's not. But, you know, I think that we all know the chismosas in our community. One of my titas is a chismosa, and honestly, I do not want to be the target of her chismes, but when she tells me stories about my grandmother, I absolutely love it, because chismosas tell stories like nobody else. So just wanted to put it out there. So in terms of our Q&A, I wanted to use that as a segue for actually Jax. There's a question for you from Precious De Leon, who I think is still here. If I look up, I think I saw, yes. Precious, you're still here. Thank you. Your question to Jax is, with discussions around visibility, I'm increasingly aware of how I've internalized needing to be seen as non-threatening and docile, or to just go with the flow. As a writer, so somebody here in the arts, it's an ongoing battle for me to balance my heritage, my evolving values, and my awareness of the untapped powers we have to shape our own stories as Filipinx Canadians. From what the panelists have said, it's evident that this is not unique to my situation. What kind of tangible steps can we start putting into action to encourage or empower Filipinx to use our voices? So, Jax, if there's anything that you'd like me to repeat, let me know, but you can go ahead and take it away.
That's a great question. I wish I could read it so I could reference it, but start writing. That is really where it comes down to. Sit down, get your pen and your paper out, because that's the work. We can figure out other ways of marketing after, like get the work done, because I think that's often like an oversight. And I know you're a writer, so you know, but I think processing in the work is the most valuable part. It's the hardest and it's isolating, but even when you in discussions like these, like having this social, like the support of amazing women like this, having the space to hold conversation like this, what Darla was saying, to have your ideas reflected and lifted, you know, like jumping points where you're wondering about something, and then somebody takes it to another level. It's like live research where you have like living archives talking and sharing. It's incredible. Like, if you ever, at the Pinay Power conference, was the first time I'd ever been in a space like this where like everybody was decolonizing. I know can be a problematic term in some ways if it's not intentional, but it does something where when you're surrounded by like-minded people and learning from them who are doing the work deep academic work too. Research helps. I mean, check out Nellie. She's doing it. I mean, I love hearing about deeper ways of looking at process. So I don't, I wish you, is there anything that I didn't address in that question? I wish I could see it, but where is it?
I think Jax,
still in there?
Yeah, if you go to the chats, I think the question is there for you. So I think that she also wanted to know, I think that you've answered a lot of it in terms of just writing and just getting it out there. You don't necessarily have to publish anything, but as you summed up that just write it. But yes, go ahead, share the question. If there's anything else that you'd like to add in terms of Precious. Precious's question.
Yes. I think we've mentioned before how the Black Lives Matter movement isn't just for Black lives, it's for all of us. When the people who are most oppressed are liberated is when we can also, but then that's the bar, like the lowest bar, literally. And for if Indigenous and Black lives are recognized with dignity, then we know that the things are going to shift for us as well. And I'm saying that because I am inspired by reading Angela Davis, watching her interviews, reading like Bell Hooks, all the writers who shifted culture, because it also awakens me to understanding what white supremacy is. If you want to get deeper and shed that docility, our throat chakras are wide open now, I think, with this space. If you follow Layla Saad, do her workbook, you'll discover that there's even just a knowing that you can call out white supremacy in a town hall for artists. Like, it's just quite healing, I'd have to say, because that's never been done. And it's, well, for me in Calgary, Alberta, like the Texas of Canada, it's pretty brutal here as far as how there isn't really, that's just a burgeoning movement. But doing the work of what Nellie, everybody here is doing, like of pushing against a system that is completely oppressive, and learning how to move and navigate with your voice is going to help you move out of that docility and quiet. I don't know if that helps. Thanks.
Thank you, Jax. We are towards the end of the webinar. Yes, 2 hours went by really quickly. Yes, we did think that an hour and a half was going to be enough, but obviously 2 hours is not. So maybe we'll be having more of these discussions in the future, because it looks like it's really important. Again, there were nearly 30 questions that our audience submitted. We were only able to ask a couple. So thank you for those who submitted. But just to close off, there's a couple more questions. We discussed a lot of things today. We discussed the history of our community, the problems that our community was already facing before COVID, what our community is facing now, colonial mentality, how do we also decolonize ourselves, and how do we also build alliances and solidarity with other oppressed communities, such as the Indigenous communities here in Turtle Island, and also with organizations such as Black Lives Matter. So it's a lot of work that I think that each one of us is doing. So as one of the final questions, and we've already alluded to some of it, like Darla has already mentioned it, and Ati Francia, and also Nellie, but how do we, as I guess individuals who are doing the work, how do we also do self-care? How do we not burn out, especially in this time?
I'm happy to go first again. So I know that for myself, besides my involvement with Gabriella, I am also a youth worker, and I also do freelance work because there's precarity in youth work, so it's important to have extra income. But self-care looks different for everyone, so that's the first important point I want to make. And I'm also very, very grateful to be in a position where I can go to therapy. I have a history of mental health in my family, and La Arnie and other folks on this panel have talked a lot about mental health you know, and I'm not going to go into that, but I think that for me, it's been going to therapy and also being very clear with boundaries that we set, because I know that my parents have tried their best. And, you know, sometimes you just have to figure out what's best for you, and it's not what your parents are going to want for you. But it comes with the colonial mentality around accessing mental health services. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Who'd like to jump in?
I think self-care for me is about surrounding yourself with good people, right? Positive people. The support that you get from them are enormous, right? The work that we do, Mila, Arnie, and Darla, and Ellie, it's getting all the problems of people. It's not easy, but how do I self-care? I I have to put boundaries, but also I like to be with people that are like-minded and are positive. So and that helps me a lot. Even if I work like long hours, by the end of the day, I'll come home. I talk to people that I love and I like, and I think that that's very, very important. So do not worry about things that are hindi naman kailangan, right? I know it's easy to say. However, just be positive. I mean, and feel that you're more privileged. I think in seeing a lot of the families that we are working with, we can see that we are actually grateful to be in this position to be able to help. So I think more positivity in life, I think, would help. Thank you.
Thank you, Ate Francia. And so we've got our last three, Jax, Darla, and Laarni, who'd like to go.
Okay, I'll go first. I was a very Filipino. Jax was for me, self-care. I agree with Ate Francia. I am happy because I am surrounded by people I love, and I am in a safe home. I wish I could say that everyone, at this time would have it, but I'm just glad to have a safe home. And for me personally, because my mind is always cluttered, I have to have a certain form of structure every day. So just to show you guys, I actually dress up for work every day, shoes included. Yeah, and my family, they're always laughing at me, but for me, that's self-care. I want to look nice, even if I work from home. So I dress up every day. I make sure that I look good, even if they're all laughing at me. They stop laughing at me because this is the 3rd month I've been doing this, but I dress up for work at home. And that has set the structure. So after this, I'll be changing into my pajamas. So that's my structure too. But for me, that's self-care. It's really having a certain form of structure every day. I wish I can say I've been working out and I've been exercising, but I'm super lazy. I can't do that. I've been eating. I have gained so much weight since the pandemic, but that's okay. We're still lucky to have food to eat. So that's what I would always tell them when people tell me tumataba ka. At least may perang pambili ng pagkain, di ba? So there. So yeah. Okay, Jax.
I'll take that. Thank you for that. Yeah, all of these were great points. Like taking care of yourself routine, and having a therapist who understands, speaks to racial identity and not just blows it over. It's great. I've also, at the beginning of COVID, I met I started doing these online meditations with folks from the Center of Babaylan Studies. And it's just been really powerful because to have I've removed myself from religion, and I have no judgment on any religion you have. It's just a technology to access the greater, however you get to the Wi-Fi, whatever you do. But I think that I'm Linux, I don't need the interface, but meditating is a really powerful way of just to quiet down my mind, because there's so many things going on. And this period now, more than anything, demands that you have a dedicated space in your home just to kind of quiet your mind, to sit and connect with your greater energy. So, and my comfort food, chicken adobo. That's like my thing. Yeah, I'm trying different versions. Like I just tried it with coconut milk and adding butternut squash. Yeah, cooking is really kind of a thing. And I am not working out. I totally am not. Wish I, yeah, what Lardy said, it helps me, but I am not. But I should. And that's the worst word to say, but for self-care, but my bike rides are good. That's all. Anyways, and my dog really is helpful in getting me outside.
Thank you, Jax. And Darla, how would you like to close it off in terms of your own self-care in light of everything that's going on in the world?
Self-care, yeah, that's something I need to work on, right? When you're in social service, like just go, 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 right? Yeah. So what do I do for self-care? I'm on the lookout for vicarious trauma, right? Because that can really sneak up on you. And I have my partner that I debrief with, and she does the same too. She works as a school teacher, so she has those days too, right, where she needs to check in. So we check in with each other. I always make sure now I'm getting into the habit of having at least one day doing nothing, just nothing, just one day of nothing, Sabi nga nila, ang Diyos nagpahinga yung ikapitong araw, right? So, yeah, that. Plus, I mean, I think I'm lucky that I work with Filipino women, and you know how hilarious they could be, right? Yeah, there's a lot of humor that they bring with the work. Doesn't matter how difficult their situation is, they're always laughing about something, right? So I think I'm lucky in that respect that the Filipino women have, a lot of sense of humor. It makes the work a little bit easier. And, they're very resilient. So yeah, that's me.
All right, thank you so much. Before we wrap it up and we get to our thank yous, I just want to ask the panelists, where can people reach you? What are your social medias? How do we get social with you guys? So come on, let's start. Darla, would you like to let us know how can we get social with you on interwebs?
Social, I guess we can give you the phone number, right? Yeah, where do I post that? On the Q&A? Or
I think that perhaps the attendees can also contact the organizers, either on Eventbrite or the Facebook event, and then I think that the organizers will be happy to send you your contact information. But if you have any socials, let us know. Anybody would like to share? Go ahead. Nellie, would you like to tell people how they can get in contact with you in your organization?
Yes, yeah, there we go. So if folks are interested in learning more about the work of Gabriela BC, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. Just type in the search engine of Facebook and Instagram, Gabriela BC. And yeah, and I guess if you want to say hello to me, I'm at HeyNels on Instagram. Currently not very active though. Youth worker caseloads have increased incrementally since COVID. Thank you all.
Oh, that's what you meant. Okay, well, I'm on Facebook, so just type my name in there, Darla Tamelan, and we have a Pinoy Pride Vancouver page as well. So yeah, you can contact me through there as well.
Thank you. Jax, would you like to go next? You have a book to promote.
Yeah, it's so behind, but like it's coming out. It is. I know people in there like, where's the book? But it's Home is in the Body on Instagram, and you can pre-order on Anak Winnipeg's website, but you could also just order the book when it comes out next month. Home is in the Body, and then Bahaghari Filipinx is on Instagram and Facebook. It's the 2S LGBTQIA plus Filipinx group grassroots group in Calgary, Monquistas, and with Chosen Allies, we have one here, and also at the Francia, and also if you want to just find me on Instagram, I'm Jax Detao, JAQSDETAO. There, I just put it in there. But also the Unlearning channel is a podcast on unlearning white supremacy, one podcast at a time. Thanks.
Thank you, Jax. And Arnie and Ati Francia, how can people get in touch with you?
I'm not very good with social media. I have a Facebook account, but very seldom that I use it. But yeah, if people wants to connect, I have my, and I think I can give permission for the organizer to give my email address or even my telephone number. That is okay. I think I don't have. I'm so boring.
It's okay. Well,
Thank you.
Arnie, is there anything that you'd like to share?
I am like,
Oh no.
I'm like Ate Francia. I have a Facebook account, but I'm rarely on Facebook. I will give the organizer. I think the organizers can pass on my email address and my number too.
Great. Thank you. And I'm Charlene Sayo, the moderator for this evening. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, I'm available on, I'm available. You can find me on Instagram at constructing Char, constructing_Char. I'm also involved with a memorial tribute site, an online memorial tribute site to fallen Filipino healthcare workers that have died around the world. I'm part of the international committee alongside with the International Committee of Affirm, which is a feminist organization in the United States. So we launched this website last month, and it's called kanlungan.net. It's a live website, so if you can see who have passed away. If you'd like to put in a tribute, you can definitely submit a name. We are updating it every few days. And then you can also find me through my Medium blog. Just Google Charlene Sayo and Medium, and you'll find me there. So before we close off, I just wanted to really remind the attendees that there is a chance for all of you to participate in the Chica session, which is happening in just a couple of minutes. If you have any more things that you'd like to add, if you want to share more of your stories, or if you have questions for the panelists, you should have received already an email invite to that. It is unmoderated, and you could be in that room for about 30 minutes. So not a lot of time, but you do have time. I want to also just close it off to thank our panelists, Francia, Nelly, Jax, Darla, and Arnie, for sharing your insight, your thoughts, your stories, and your lived experiences. Please follow Tulayan and Filipinos Rising on social media. And I want to thank the lead organizations, again, Tulayan and Filipinos Rising, as well as Hummingbird's Rising Consultation, for their work in terms of putting this all together. But in particular, I want to really thank Ati Sani Jo Rambua, Minnie Antonio, Nelly Agbolos, Easy Fortuna, and Justine Ramirez. Some of them were working behind the scenes as we were doing this webinar. They've been working hard at this event for the last couple of months now. So thank you so much for putting it all together. And we will be sending out an email, like a survey, and email with all the links that we mentioned here this evening to all of our attendees. And our attendees, thank you so much. We've recorded this, so we will be posting this in the next, hopefully in the next day or two, for those who've missed it or would like to see more of the discussion. Again, thank you for those who stuck around. Again, I'm your moderator, Charlene, and thank you for attending.